Hello, everybody. It's another Sunday night, and that means it is time for another episode of Explain Yourself, where we're going to talk about some indie comics with some great creators that have a live project I think everybody's going to really enjoy checking out. It's going to bring in Allan and Ben Liska, who are here to talk about their comic today, The Press Guardian and the Clock. Guys, how's it going?
Doing well. And I got to say, one of the things that I love about your podcast is your intro music is so jaunty and uplifting. Every other podcast is, comics podcast is like, rain down hell from earth has
That
that
sounds
like
fun too,
big
actually.
music. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that sounds fun too, actually. But yeah, no, I was trying to make it as much like Sports Center as I could. That's really all I was going for there. But yeah, thanks. But I'm really excited to talk about your book because, like me, you're a big fan of kind of the pulp golden age era of storytelling and characters. And I think you're reviving some of those characters in your comic that you're here to talk about today. So tell us a little bit about the quick pitch for The Press Guardian and the Clock.
So, like you said, the Press Guardian and the Clock are two Golden Age characters who never really got the attention they deserved. Although the Press Guardian was around for about the Clock was around for about 5 years, but the Press Guardian was only around for a year. And they are really interesting characters that never got fully developed. So we wanted to do that. And the thing that we wanted to do was set them in their time and get them to punch some Nazis. And that's what our book is about. It's about the Press Guardian and the Clock coming together to fight Nazi saboteurs in 1942 on U.S. soil.
Yeah, I love it. And if you read those old comics, it's surprising how often during World War II, and I guess I can see why, because it would sort of be disrespectful to have, the Justice Society going over to Europe and solving the whole war when people were actually over there fighting for real. But almost every plot line in Captain America was not him over in Europe. It was like him in America fighting saboteurs, fighting, people doing stuff on our shores. So it's kind of cool to just take, a Golden Age plot, which was kind of what they really concentrated on, and just do that today, and just with a little more polish and, pace it differently. So that's something I always like to see. I'm a big fan of all these old characters and the atmosphere. So you mentioned that these two characters were a little underutilized. I don't think I'd heard of either of them, actually. What drew you to these guys as opposed to some of the more well-known ones?
Well, so the Clock is, by some people have said, the first masked superhero. So he was, Will Eisner has said he's one of the direct inspirations for the Spirit. And so that's kind of cool. The fact that he is just one of the first out there before Batman, out there before Superman, not a superhero, just a guy in a suit fighting bad guys. And then the Press Guardian, for me at least, like that defender of the freedom of the press, literally the defender of the Fourth Estate is how he was labeled in Pep Comics. And we need that. We need people that are, reminders that for all the flaws the press has, we need a free press to make sure that, you have a functioning society. And so I think reminding people that even in the 1930s and 40s, there were artists that were thinking about that. And the Press Guardian is written by Mort Meskin. And if a lot of your viewers or listeners aren't familiar with Mort Meskin, I recommend looking him up, because he was so influential so early on in the comics world. And he's somebody that's not talked about very much, but he had his hands kind of in a lot of different pots during the Golden Age era.
Yeah, I think I've heard the name, but I wouldn't be able to tell you like what he had done or what he was most well known for.
Yeah. So probably most well known for Sheena of the Jungle.
Okay.
But if you know the leading comics, the Seven Soldiers of Victory, which was like Green Arrow and Speedy and Vigilante and all of those others. He did many of the covers for leading comics. He did the first Black Cat, the first iteration of Black Cat, but he's also done covers for Superman and Batman and so on. So again, very early on, but he was involved in a lot of these different comics that you know about today.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I think I'm trying to think. I think the Phantom was most things I've read of the Phantom. I think was 37 was kind of the first like mask and tights hero. I did not know about the Clock being like the first masked hero that was in comics. I know that there was a few guys in the pulps. I think that were earlier than that that were kind of like maybe the Black Bat or something like that. That was a big. I mean, he's really close to Batman, kind of a Zorro sort of thing. I mean, I don't think anybody was copying anybody. I think it's just a pretty obvious way to go with Zorro and God, who else? Scarlet Pimpernel.
Lone Ranger.
Oh yeah, Lone Ranger, absolutely.
But I mean, Lone Ranger started on the radio. Wasn't into comics until much later. So So yeah, certainly there were masks worn, just generally not in comics. But that's not the kind of comics people were doing in the 30s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things. I mean, I always kind of been drawn to the pulp stuff. And when I started really researching it for Scarlet Twilight, I I was kind of surprised at, I guess or not surprised necessarily, but really appreciated. And it was fun to watch people figure out what was cool in comics, what made, superheroes cool. What was like the first Superman comic was like all these small panels, but he was doing cool things. And then you read 20 issues of that, you can really see, okay, what people are responding to, or, I think what the artists and writers themselves realized was interesting to see people like this do. And I think that it's really cool to go back at that stuff. And I'll bring up some of your pages for your comic to kind of try and take some of that stuff, the energy, but, with the hindsight we have now about after 100 plus years of superhero comic, well, I guess not quite 100 plus years.
Right.
We've seen, it's we've seen what works, what doesn't, what's cool. To just bring that back to the era is really fun, and I think really appealing for readers and backers. So tell us a little bit about the plot of this and like how they team up and what you're kind of doing with the characters.
Ben, go ahead.
Oh yeah. So this was like many great plots, stolen from real life history. So Operation Pistorius is it Pistorius, Allan? I've never
Pistorius,
heard of it. Okay. It's a plot to smuggle Nazis into the US and have them sabotage the war effort by destroying infrastructure. And so we did what all great writers do, which is we took some history and filed off the serial numbers and asked different questions about how it would go if there were masked heroes around to stop it. And this was actually Allan's brainchild, and I tag teamed in to help with some of the editing. But we wanted to put these two heroes together and have them kind of play off each other. And one of the hard things to do, one of the interesting things to do, is you got two guys in suits walking around doing superhero stuff. So you got to keep them kind of differentiated, both in the way they talk and in the way they're drawn. And our artist, Dan Butcher, did a fantastic job with that.
Yeah, no, I definitely can tell the roles they're playing, and it's kind of, I would think really tough because you did not have a ton of variation in hairstyles or anything about these characters back in the day. They were always just dudes that had like the same haircut, same hairline, the same expression. I mean, you really can't tell Slam Bradley apart from Superman in those old comics, like at all.
Well, it's funny. So the middle panel that you have right now is the Clock, or Brian O'Brien in his regular identity, and then to his right is Pug, his assistant. And in the original Clock, Pug intentionally looks just like the Clock. So like they're like doppelgangers basically. And that was a limitation of how much you could draw, how much you could differentiate back in the day. But we decided to kind of include that back in here, because if we carry these stories any further, they did all kinds of fun plot things with that. I mean, going back to the Batman 1966, where Alfred would dress up in Superman's outfit, or Batman's outfit, so that Bruce Wayne could be somewhere and Batman could be somewhere. There's a lot that you could play around with that, and they did in the original comic. But mostly, I think it was just a practical thing where you can only draw so many faces.
Yeah, especially. You look at the stuff, just the printing, how thick everything would kind of soak into the newsprint, you really couldn't get in there and do super detailed work. You had to just lay stuff down and leave a lot of, leave room for color. And especially since you had to pack 8-9 panels on the page back then, nothing was going to be that big, that zoomed in. So yeah, it was really, it's hard to appreciate how much work must have gone into doing all that stuff with those limitations as artists, while also figuring out like what the hell this art form is going to be and what people respond to.
Yeah. I mean, they were learning, and I feel like we're back in that phase now with the growth of all of these indie comics, where we're relearning what the medium can be. I'm not saying us, I'm not saying we're avant-garde or anything, but
well, that was the joke I told Allan. Do you think people are ready for our groundbreaking comic with a bulletproof news reporter and a rich guy who drives around a fancy car with his sidekick, like in a mask? That's cutting edge stuff, but it is a lot of fun, and you can play with plot elements and things like that. So
yeah, exactly. And I love seeing that. That's why I love that we're seeing this kind of regrowth of these indie comics, because it is very much mirrors what we were seeing in the 30s and 40s as they were trying to figure out what is comics going to be. Because, the earliest comics were, okay, here's boy comics, which are Westerns and space adventures and space Western adventures. And here's some girl comics that have kissing and romance and, and Nancy and stuff like that. And, kind of how all of that evolved into the things that were selling the most and then didn't sell and then sold again.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that to your point about like just the style, you're saying you're kind of like not too avant-garde about the style of things, but I think that, if you look at the way people are messing with stuff with conventions and plot points that we're used to, or just kind of conventions we're used to, I think we're seeing a lot of that now, maybe just because we've had over the last, I want to say like probably since maybe the 90s, when everything, like late 80s, you had stuff that was just a really clear Bronze Age looking things that had been around for about 20 years and you're pretty used to it. The books all kind of look the same. The styles look the same. You had like an Art Adams or a Neil Adams somewhere doing a little bit better versions of it, but it wasn't necessarily like suddenly Jim Lee did stuff or McFarlane did stuff. It was like a big jump. Then you had like all the widescreen guys in the early 2000s. And I think that people are now getting away from that with like, we'd have stuff that was more cinematic and really decompressed. And then I think regular comics have kind of worked their way back to something in the middle. I think we've seen enough change in the last 10, 15 years and just people using different elements of, I guess, storytelling methods, that we're in a spot now where people doing indie comics are like playing with so much different stuff. And I think really fun ways that it probably doesn't make sense to do in a big tube book or even an image book where you're just really serving an existing market. You're kind of pitching things that you expect would get picked up by these places based on what else they do. Like you don't see a lot of experimentation is my point. And I think that's what's cool about our little sphere is that's where that's happening.
Yeah. There was one of the favorite comics I picked up off Kickstarter this year is one called Blinded. And the whole comic is done in black. It's about a guy who wakes up and he's blind and trying to figure out what's going on. And so every panel is black except for the lettering, but the way they do the lettering shows how much the sounds around him are impacting him. And so it's a really compelling comic. Now, you're not going to sell 100,000 of those or maybe even 10,000 of those, but he found a niche audience on Kickstarter and was able to have a successful campaign. And I really enjoyed the comic because he's playing with one element of the comic that too often we don't think about, the lettering aspect of it. That's something that Ben and I have had to learn is, all right, how do we make sure we leave enough room in the panel for the lettering? And how do we make sure that, that we're not, doing a Kevin Smith comic where it's, 5 paragraphs of exposition in every panel. That's that becomes a challenge, and the way they're doing it, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a big challenge when you're, I mean, especially I think you guys are probably a little more control is you're both co-writers, you're working with an artist, but you're essentially the editors and you're putting this, you're producing it more or less. And I think it's really hard when because I've talked with people in indie comics that have pretty big teams. You've got somebody doing every pencils, inks, colors, and they're all different people. And it's got to be a lot of work to corral everybody, as far as like, hey, you got to leave room for this guy's thing, or for people to work together, because this is usually somebody's first or second comic, and it's hard to know not just how to do it, but also to work with a team. Is your artist doing everything here? Is he doing the artwork and the colors, or do you have someone different doing that?
So for this one, we have the same person doing the the same person doing the art and the colors. That hasn't always been the case. It's just Dan is really talented, and he wanted to take on everything because he really loved the project, and so we were more than happy to work with him to do that. And it does. You're absolutely right. It does make a difference. We have other comics where we have somebody doing the art and then another person doing the coloring, and kind of going back and forth and making sure that everything stays updated and stays consistent is a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that behind the scenes stuff that I think people give short shrift to. But it's really important to making sure that what backers get at the end is as good as it can be.
Yeah.
Maybe I should have asked about this earlier. You kind of gave us a quick rundown on each of these characters, but I want to know more about the Clock and the Press Guardian. Tell me about like their kind of their setup and powers, if any.
So weirdly, to your point about the experimentation, the Clock, because it ran for 6 years total, actually they had a chance to experiment. So initially no powers, just a guy in the mask that lived in a cave under the police station and issued retribution to the to bad guys, the people that the police couldn't take down. Think of it like, because I think when the comic was first released, the Green Hornet was already on the radio. So kind of like Green Hornet, except he wasn't pretending to be the bad guy. He was just a guy who lived in a cave under the police station, as one does. And then, but he moved from publication to publication. So, he was picked up by different publications, basically wherever, George Brenner could get them to pick him up. And so in the second iteration is when he met Pug. And so that ran for about a year that way. And then after Pug, he when Robin became very popular, instead of Pug, his fighting assistant was now a 13-year-old girl. Probably super appropriate. That's why we decided to stick with Pug for this. And then, he would sometimes develop superpowers. So like in one, he had like, I can go out of body and find the bad guys and then go get them. I'm like, well, where'd that come from? So I think they were trying to figure out how to make this character more successful and more line up, as in the 30s to the 40s, we were moving away from fighting mobsters and thugs to now guys in capes and tight-fitting suits. So they were trying to figure out if they could make him fit, and it just wasn't ever big enough. The Press Guardian is a little more interesting because they never acknowledged any superpowers, but he appeared to be bulletproof. But what he would say is he would make a joke, and we carried that tradition here. He would make a joke every time he got shot. He'd say something like, you got to buy better bullets than that, or it's going to take a stronger bullet than that to take me out. Something like that. So he appeared to be bulletproof. It just wasn't explicitly stated. So we did the same thing in our comic, where he gets shot a couple times and he just makes a joke about Nazi bullets. What was the joke you put in, Ben? Like,
well, there was one. Well, do we want to spoil the jokes?
We'll spoil one of the jokes.
The one joke was, I'll do the second joke, which is, the only thing worse than a Nazi's morals is their aim, or something like that.
There you go. And it's kind of fun to be able to write those, because you want to keep that voice from the 40s. And so you're like, all right, what's a corny, like, not just dad joke, but at this point, great granddad joke that we can make that would, be appropriate for the time. And so that was, again, part of the fun of writing these characters in their time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really struggled with that because I wanted to get a lot more of those weird little things. Like Batman would run into a group of gangsters and like tackle them and be like, "Watch out for the Batman Limited" or something like that. It would just really, it was cool. It was really period specific. I liked it, and then I try and kind of adapt something like that, and I half the time I just would sort of chicken out. I guess I'm like, this is just so, I don't know. I don't think people are going to get it, which is stupid because if you're buying that comic, you're probably somewhat familiar with this stuff and have read those and are used to those. I wouldn't call them one-liners exactly, and some of them are, but they're just a weird thing that they had superheroes do when they're like hitting somebody or something like that that you really only get in that period. So it's I think certainly worth throwing in. It sounds like you guys embrace that a lot more wholeheartedly than I was able to.
We're
But
doing
yeah.
now that Buck Rogers has gone into the public domain, we're submitting a Buck Rogers story to an anthology, and I had him say something um, where he used the word hell, and Ben's like, I looked up the etymology of that, and it turns out blazes would be more appropriate for 1919 than hell. I don't remember the exact line, but
It was what the hell, and
oh, what the hell, right?
I was like, like they swore, but it wasn't quite as explicit. So I was like, probably not the H word. So, and like the Oxford English Dictionary is actually really good for that. Unfortunately, they're like a subscription service, but you can sometimes get Google to give you the answer for free or for your personal information, whatever Google does. So like I was like, okay, yeah, this came into use in like the 1920s. Like I was gonna put in a joke about something about flying by the seat of the pants, but I was like, oh, that didn't come up until like the 1930s, so we're not using that one.
Yeah, I had a lot of time looking up, and I ended up just going with comics. I'd find like old pulp comics and just be like, all right, if they use this reference, I'm not gonna say like 23 Skidoo or something like that, and hope it works or it makes sense or people. I don't even know what I did look up what that meant once, and it just wasn't worth the time I spent doing it. But yeah, I ended up just saying like, all right, I'm referring to these comics. If I find it in those, it's fair game as far as accuracy.
Yeah.
But yeah,
One
that
of the
sounds.
most popular shorts that I did on YouTube, and our shorts aren't very popular, but one of the most popular was a look at Holy Hannah. In the
Mhm.
50s and 60s, that was a common phrase that superheroes would use is Holy Hannah when something went wrong. And I'm like, where did this come from? And it was one of those, I forget what the phenomenon is, but you notice it once and then you start noticing it repeatedly. And I happen to
Oh
be going,
yeah, there is a word for that. Oh God, I don't know what it is. But yeah,
do
I've heard of
you
that.
don't know, Ben, do you?
Not off the top of my head. I have a couple. I have a couple of ideas about what it might be, but like I don't think they're right. So
Yeah. We'll figure it out before the end of the thing, I'm sure. But it'll hit us. But it was like I started noticing it in all these like 50s and 60s. I'm like, holy Hannah, what is that? And yeah, it turned out that it was just a phrase used across a bunch of comic books in the 50s and 60s. No particular writer, no particular brand, because it was in DC and Marvel. It was just that's what they would use instead of whatever curse word or word you might want to use instead, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, I've always wanted, and that's one of the reasons I try and research this stuff because you never know what was kind of like, um, kind of fake or just wasn't right. I'm a big fan of Sergey Leone, and I mean everybody loves like Good, Bad, and the Ugly and that stuff, but he made a lot of other movies, and one in particular was called Duck You Sucker. I think it's also called A Fistful of Dynamite, which is a much better title for it.
Yeah.
But the actor, I think James Coburn was talking about the movie. And he said, I just really hated that title, but Sergio Leone, for some reason, was just convinced Americans walked around saying that at any point in history. And it's a stupid phrase. It doesn't sound good. And I always worry something like if I'd find Holy Hannah in like a comic, I'd be like, I really kind of want to know a little bit more about what this was. Just for some kind of peace of mind / accuracy. Yeah, you guys have found, I think, a lot of really good ways that I would never have thought of to research this stuff a little better.
Yeah, we try. Weirdly, the one thing with Holy Hannah The one person who never used it, as far as I could tell, was Robin. Again, growing up with 1966 Batman, I would expect that would be a Robin phrase.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Never used by him.
You really can hear that coming out of Burt Ward's mouth. Like
Yep.
it sounds
can.
right.
I wonder if he's on Cameo. Can we get him to say Holy Hannah for $300 or whatever?
Bader Meinhof is apparently the phenomenon we're talking about.
That's right. Yes.
No.
I thought it was Dunning-Kruger, but that's a different thing. And
yeah.
if I had said Dunning-Kruger, I would have been susceptible to
You
Dunning-Kruger.
would have been doing a Dunning-Kruger.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So there you go.
Yeah, I kept thinking Mandela effect, which is a different thing also, but
Right. That's the Mandela effect. That's thinking that a thing, a lot of people thinking a thing happened that never happened, like Shaq being in a Genie movie or something like that.
wait, no, he was definitely in a Genie movie.
He was definitely in a
Shaq
Genie
Fu.
movie.
No, Kazam.
Kazam.
Yeah. I worked in a movie theater around that time. I was definitely there when Steel came out, and literally 32 people all day came to see at all the showings, came to see it, and it was gone in 2 days. I think it was the least successful, certainly at my short tenure in the movie business, was the least successful movie I've ever seen. I actually kind of want to watch it one of these days. I never, most of the movies, they'd stick around, so we just would watch it during breaks. I think I'd seen Men in Black and Hercules like 5 times each and stuff like that. But Steel was just in and out. Like nobody even knew it was there. Or Shaq.
Yeah.
But so back to some of these comics. I really I kind of wanted to ask you about your collaboration with your artist. I know he works on another book, and you guys have worked with him on this one a little bit. Did you guys talk about trying to bring in, like, one of the things with Scarlet Twilight I really tried to get into was doing the captions a little bit differently, like you kind of see here, where it would be just off to the side or something like that. Did you guys make a lot of conscious decisions or talk about which of those elements you wanted to use and what you needed to update? Because I think that's really the fun of going back to stuff like this, is kind of deciding, hey, what can I take and polish up, and what do I replace with something new that's going to make everything else that's left seem a lot fresher?
We wanted to have the feel of a 40s comic book. Now, we wanted to have the feel of the 40s comic book, but I wasn't willing to put it on 40s paper. There are still a couple of printers out there where you could print up an American sized comic book on essentially newspaper print, but I wasn't quite ready to do that. So the paper and the cover are going to be definitely more modern style, and that's just for durability. Like, I'd be afraid to ship those even in proper mailers and properly secured. But like, the font choice was really important to make sure that it felt like something out of the 1940s, that it wasn't too modern. And that is with the shout outs and with the SFX, like making sure the SFX were appropriate for the time as well. So all of those things definitely kind of go into it. And we have a Slack channel set up that the three of us are in, that give us that ability to have these, if he's got a quick question, he can just shoot it in the Slack and one of us can answer, or we can debate back and forth. And if he has, again, like Ben said, if he has an idea that's like, oh, what if I did this? We're like, yeah, okay, that works. So doing that. Now, it helps that we found an artist that really loves that period of time and was really excited to do that. And so he, like us, was researching that to make sure everything was appropriate for that time.
Yeah, that's a real, it's a pain to do. I mean, and I don't necessarily think it's a pain. If you like history, and I really get into a lot of that stuff, I mean, I can just lose myself for a day looking into, the West Side Highway, how long it was running and when it did what. And that's probably not a great use of my time, because I have a book to draw. But it's fun to do that. And I think it does actually make a huge difference in the final product, because you're obviously you're going to people that are into this stuff. There's all people that are into more modern stuff aren't really probably going to go after this anyway. And I think it's important to just cater to the people who are into that stuff. And even if it's not something everybody appreciates, I think there's times where I've read stuff that I can tell it's really researched, even if it's a topic I'm not that into or not that well versed in. It's easy to tell when somebody's done their homework and it does kind of add to the atmosphere or something.
Yeah. You know, I think Ben and I take a little bit of inspiration from Alan Moore, and you know, like the work that he did with the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and V for Vendetta, and even The Watchmen, of that research into the Victorian era or the French Revolution, or you know, whatever that he's doing prior to doing the comic book. And we both very much like to go down rabbit holes, which can be a problem when you're supposed to be writing a script. But sometimes the rabbit holes are really fun, and you find something that's like, I want to do that. You know, it does lead to kind of more ideas for other kinds of comics. It's when Ben and I table together, it's really bad. I almost want to bring a third person, because we'll sit and brainstorm for kind of the other comics that we want to do as you know, as ideas come to us.
Yeah, and that's one of the fun things about doing books, especially if you're going to research it. You come across 10 other things. It's like, oh wait, that's probably not for this story, but that's awesome, and I want to use it in something. And that's actually led to a lot of like my ideas for stuff. It's like, okay, I'm researching this. I really like this one character. I don't have a use for it, but especially in the next project I'm doing, which is kind of a Crisis on Infinite Earths, but in the Golden Age. To just be able to like go after all these old characters that I liked. When I was designing my main character, I had a real kind of narrow, you know, like I could only pick up these things for his design, but there were so many other things I liked. And it was kind of a good way for me to just take a deep breath and say, okay, cool, we can work that stuff in down the road in a cool way and focus on what this one should be right now. Because it's such a fertile like era to play in. I think is even though there's a really narrow type of story that was created, and all the heroes have so much in common. Sometimes they, you know, some of these panels of the clock, you'd think it was the spirit, but there is actually just so much cool stuff to play with. But to what you said a little bit earlier about your niche, how have you kind of like, I think it is smart, and I've certainly seen a lot of stuff about doing business online, that the more niche you can get, the better. I've pretty much found that to be true. Have you kind of like, has kind of doing something that's not necessarily everything else on the stands, it's not in that style, has that kind of like driven your creative process a little bit in terms of like what you want to put in the story and what kind of characters you want to use, what art you want to use, and things like that?
Yeah, I think so. So, you know, the first comic we did was based on a radio serial, Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar. And Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar was a freelance insurance investigator, traveled around the world, punching bad guys and submitting expense reports, which, you know, is kind of a weird combination for a, you know, action, you know, for an action radio drama. But it was neat, and there's still a lot of people that listen to it. So what we did is we took him and we turned him into a freelance cyber insurance investigator, and now he travels around the world punching ransomware guys, because our lawyers won't let us do that. And we thought that, you know, hey, ransomware is kind of the updated equivalent of gangsters and mobsters of the 40s and 50s. Only they're in Russia instead of downtown Chicago. But you know, could we tell a compelling story there? And so that was kind of the first thing that we did, and we really wanted to keep that pulp feel, but set him in a modern age. So you know, think Humphrey Bogart and the Maltese Falcon, but a modern guy, a competent guy. Like Johnny Dollar was always the most competent guy in the room, and so we wanted to keep that feel. Just make him feel old school in the middle of that, and that drove, like, you know, that you think, okay, that weird niche of people that like that like these old time radio shows and the pulp stuff, and don't like cybercrime. Like, you'd think that Venn diagram is about two people. But it turns out that it's more than that. You know, the people who love Johnny Dollar love that we really love and care about the character. The people that, you know, don't like cybercrime are like, oh, cool, it's a comic book about ransomware. That's neat. And then just broadly, the people who like pulp are like, well, that's a really cool pulp character. Let's, I want to learn more about it. And so many people that we've talked to who are fans of the radio show or fans of our comic book that became fans of the radio show, that was kind of, very fulfilling. And then, we started thinking about, well, what other pulp characters can we do that with? And that's, you see behind Ben, our second comic was The Green Archer, which is a 1923 book by Edgar Wallace that was then turned into a 1940 movie serial. And, and that's about an archer who is killed in 1487 and continues to protect Gar Castle in Scotland, at least up through 1923, and in our case now through 2087. But that gives us like kind of like the Phantom you mentioned earlier, this character that is outside of time that we can tell different stories in different eras for.
Yeah, I mean, I love that I love that you guys were kind of going back to those radio shows, because those are so much fun to listen to. And I think the things that initially I arched my eyebrow at, like if you listen to The Shadow, half the time he's fighting like a corrupt city water commissioner, just not anybody's first choice for a villain to modern ears. And even in like the Superman radio shows, which are really fun and punchy and quick, the people that go after are some of the stuff you'll see in the early Superman comics, where it's like rotten bosses or factory managers that are taking advantage of people or stuff like that. But it's funny if you do stick with those stories. While at first I kind of laughed at them in my head, I'm like, this is actually fun. It gives you a viewpoint into, like, I guess, the level of involvement people had with things like that. People probably did know who the water commissioner was or some crazy stuff like that back then. Yeah. And then if you read, history, especially like New York City history, which is just a crazy thing of its own, it makes sense. And it's kind of a fun way to, in addition to just liking The Shadow or old Superman stories, and I think this ties into the Press Guardian really well. If you look at the way Lois and Clark were out there solving mysteries essentially in the old Superman stories, and he would just generally get caught and then turn into Superman. It was really the only difference between Clark Kent and like some other crusading reporter without powers. You get a sense of like how differently those professions functioned back then, how people saw them, what people thought of them. It's just such a different world. And I think that taking that viewpoint, whether you're bringing it, doing a story that takes place in the past and you're for modern readers, or bringing the characters in the present or the future, is just always going to be inherently dramatic and fun.
Yeah. Because, and I think you're right. And to your point, that corruption, yeah, okay, maybe it seems silly to us that the water manager is corrupt, but that was a corruption that people knew, right? That was that was a corruption that might have affected them, because their water bill would go up by $2 a month, which, in the 30s and 40s, that was a big deal. If a bad contract went through, or in so many towns where there was one factory and that was the employer, and I mean that's still the case in many places where now it's just been replaced. Instead of a factory, it's an Amazon supercenter. A corrupt factory manager or foreman impacted a lot of people, and so I mean it's why now you see so many people have comics where the CEO is the bad guy, because you see a lot of that, and it mirrors that in real life. Yeah, great. Superman can go fight Brainiac and Lex Luthor, or Batman can fight the Joker. But for most people, the bad guys they face are the ones that make them feel like they're not able to get ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think those are the people in our lives, so to speak, like our real lives, that you kind of want to see that guy get it. I wish somebody was there to dangle that dude out a window and make him change his mind and say he was sorry about things. And as much as I look at these old comics, and I think the ones that really like shone were like the early Captain Marvel ones or the Marvel Family ones, because I think they were the first ones to really consistently bring in like Black Adam or I think Captain Nazi or something like that. And there he is, the big red cheese. Nice.
Not my favorite version of him, but
yeah, I mean, I think of when you go back and read those old comics, I love all of them in different ways. but there was always something missing. I think Batman was one of the strongest from the right out of the gate. Even though he didn't quite have a ton of supervillains at that point, or a ton of the conventions we're used to. Superman, I think, was a bigger gap between what we really love about Superman and what was in those first stories. Captain Marvel, I feel like, learned a lot. The people making him learned a lot faster. They learned how much fun it was to see him interact with like the talking animals and the supervillains. But I do think we lost something when we stopped messing with the real world villains as much, because I think there's that just instant wish fulfilling. I have this horrible boss that's ruining my life or ruining my town or doing this thing that's affecting us all, and I just wish somebody was there to like set that dude straight. It's funny how much of those old comics were just that basic, like really bare wish fulfillment sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and that's what our Johnny Dollar was. Our lawyers, like I said, won't let us go punch the ransomware dudes. So Johnny Dollar gets to do it for us, you know, and you know, and that is, you know, similar to, we're doing a more modern version of the clock that we're working on. And she takes out the business email compromise people, you know, the people that call up your mom and then convince her to, you know, pay the IRS with $2,000 worth of gift cards. Maybe not your mom, but I know our mom is susceptible to things like that. We have to remind her constantly, no, the IRS doesn't take gift cards. You know, and so being able to take these guys out who seem to be untouchable, like, you know, you hear about billions of dollars being stolen and nobody can do anything about it. And it's like, fine, we want a superhero that can do something about it. Because it does sometimes feel like we live in a world where the bad guys keep winning and, you know, nobody seems to answer for these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially people are, without getting political, I mean, you hear people just say, like, I can't believe person X continues to get away with this thing. It just drives them nuts that they do. And that's a pretty normal human sentiment, I think. And it's kind of funny because these old comics were just like the most base wish fulfillment power fantasy that you can imagine. And that was just like, okay, the simplest sort of story they could tell. And we have so much like soap opera to it now, which I think is necessary and important. But every now and then you just want to see somebody punch the bad guy that reminds you of the person you're dealing with in your life.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I mean, that's how Superman got started, right? You know, two young kids who wanted a superhero that could do the things that they couldn't. And so they, I mean, they weren't young kids, but they were younger than us. Let's say that. And they did. And, you know, and there is some of that missing today. You know, I mean, I love the All In series from last year that DC did. But honestly, my favorite DC event last year was the Justice League versus Godzilla versus Kong, because it was outside of it was outside of continuity, and I didn't care. I just wanted to see Superman punch Godzilla. Like, I mean, you know, and then they took that away from me because, you know, Superman's like, oh, I'm not going to punch Godzilla. I'm going to be your friend. No, you bastard. You punch Godzilla. I'm sorry. I hope I can say that word.
You can say bastard. Yeah. Well,
okay. I don't mean to get you demonetized, but
no,
I was really upset when you didn't punch Godzilla.
Well, like if you've ever read the Alex Ross maxi series that he did, Superman, Peace on Earth, Batman, War on Crime, Shazam, The Power of Hope, in one of like the big splash pages, they've got the Captain Marvel juggling bears, punching giant robots, and just, you know, like scolding someone as they like shoot him with a shotgun blast. And I'm like, this is beautiful. This is exactly what it needs to be. So yeah, there is something to that kind of direct threat response kind of comic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something where, I mean, most everybody I know, they're creators who are all like, think, God, I'd love to work for Marvel and DC someday. And you think about how to pitch stories and how to come up with stories that are pitchable, even, which is good and bad. And I think that sometimes when the nice thing about Kickstarter is you do have to think that way a little bit. You have to think about it, though, in terms of what's really appealing to backers and things like that. So I'm going to take a quick break here and play a quick commercial from our partners at All Ages of Geek. But when we come back, we should talk a little bit about that and kind of what you do to really convey the punchiness and the fun of this to people that might back the comic.
Click that mouse and warp into All Ages of Geek's website, your ultimate portal to everything geek culture. Here you'll find articles that speak your language, from the latest anime buzz to the coolest tech trends. Our mission? To celebrate geekdom in all its glory. Whether you're a gamer, a comic enthusiast, a 90s kid, or an anime aficionado, we've got something for you. Dive deep into them with All Ages of Geek.
Okay, so just like the old creators had to figure out in sometimes 8, 12 pages or sometimes even shorter, how to make this character and this adventure so appealing that kids would come back and buy it next month. How did you think about like what pages you showed in the campaign, or how you kind of structured the story to just like appeal to backers on Kickstarter and show them what they're in for?
So, the nice thing about not pitching to DC or Marvel is I don't need to appeal to 100,000 people, right? We're not trying to do that. It'd be great if 100,000 people couldn't back the campaign because it's a make 100. But I'd figure out a way if it came down to it. But what we have to you have to know what your story is, right? You have to know what your audience is. One of the things that drives me crazy on Kickstarter is when I see the people that say, oh well, this appeals to everyone, and I'm like, it probably doesn't. I'm sure it's a lovely comic, I'm sure it's a really good comic, don't get me wrong, but it probably doesn't appeal to anybody. So you have to be able to say, what is your pitch? Who are you going for? And in this case, we wholeheartedly embrace the pulp culture of it, right? Everybody likes seeing Nazis punched. That's not a that's an easy win. But doing it in a pulp setting in 1942 is going for a very specific audience, and that's when we pitch it on Twitter or Blue Sky or Instagram. That's what we talk about is how we do that. And when we're telling people about it, we're talking about, this is, if you like these old school comics, these golden age comics, we think you'll like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but I'm glad I remembered to now. If you're watching this, if you're into these types of comics and you want to check this out, the link to this campaign is right in the description, and you can click on that if you're on YouTube or Facebook and head right over there. And back this comic, which has 12 days to go. It's met its goal. Plenty of room left for 100, so we always want to make it easy as possible for people to jump over and back these projects. So check that out over there, whether you're watching this now or down the road this week. Yeah. But I think that's something that's really cool. You just don't get that from, like you said, when you're trying to do a comic that has wider appeal, you're trying to make something that appeals to everybody. It's not necessarily going to be as focused a creative vision, or not even creatively like how I'm going to write my story, but just creatively like, what am I trying to deliver to people? It's just a short comic. It's not like my Watchmen, my magnum opus necessarily. It's just like, hey, this is a tight, fun, cool adventure, fun characters. And there's something to be said for really focusing, I think, just on that.
Right. I mean, we were talking before the show started about, you had Paul Thayer on, a little while ago, and Paul is brilliant. He writes an amazing comic that I think is got a much wider appeal than what we do. And that is, and he does a great job of getting his story out and marketing that. And I think that's incredible. That's just not the kind of comic that we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But what Project Neosis does is amazing. It's just different than what we do. And I love that we can both crowdfund on Kickstarter and build this and build our own audiences in our own way.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something I've always been surprised by. Paul Thayer's book, by the way, Project Neosis, we talked to him a few weeks ago. Really cool looking book. Very like colorful, modern superhero stuff, and I think he's doing it as well as anybody out there right now. So definitely check out his books if you haven't. But I kind of found, I have another book called August Purgatory Underground, and it's a character that's like really inspired by like 80s sci-fi, Star Wars. things that I think are a lot more popular now in the rest of comics. And they have We Are Scarlet Twilight, which is like this, like kind of pulp inspired, very golden age. Really the only touchstones I think that people know about that when I'm trying to sell it is like Batman the Animated Series and Rocketeer. Much more niche, I thought, but that one's always been so much easier to get attention for than the one I thought would have a wider appeal. So I think it kind of gets inverted. People on Kickstarter are just looking for something that's a little familiar, but also just a little off the beaten path, but has some of that. I think everybody, even if they haven't sat down and read a comic from the 30s or 40s, gets some of this stuff. They've seen these panels, about old Batman comics, and they do understand a lot of what's going on here. But yeah. So just to wrap up, I mean, is there anything else you want to say about the book before we split?
I don't know, Ben. What do you want to close with?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say, like, one of the things I really loved about this was, and I'm very new to making comics, and I am very new. I'm getting back into comics, and one of the things I absolutely loved was all of the dynamic action that our artist put into each panel. Like, there were a couple of shots in here. I don't think any of them were on the preview, so you'll have to back the comic to see them. It was just some really good dynamic shots, some clever transitions and things like that, and absolutely loved it. And the cover makes me think of, I've been getting back into reading some pulp. There's kind of a pulp resurgence going on again. People are looking at the Shadow. I actually just started a reread or a first time read of A Princess of Mars, and I got the really nice 80s awesome cover paperbacks.
By Michael Whalen?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh,
And so I picked up a set of those on eBay for like a steal. Like, the front covers are all in great shape, but just like getting that good dynamic cover and getting those action panels, I absolutely I had to stop in our private Slack. I was just staring at it. I was supposed to be working. I was just staring at my phone because I was like, oh my, like, that is fantastic. Like, I never would have thought of doing that shot. In some ways it's kind of like a movie director where, like, the way that the angle you choose, the perspective you choose can really, really help the comic feel like it's moving. And he did a fantastic job at that. Allan's okay too.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, again, that's what we're trying to do. This isn't, now I'll tell you this, and please don't use this as a pull quote, because I don't want everybody hate me. But we love the Nazis in here. So we're going to take them and use them as bad guys in other things. So, spoiler alert, the Nazis don't necessarily die. But eventually they will. But it's the way that Dan drew them, and kind of the story between what Ben and I came up with and then Dan's additions to it, made them compelling villains, but not complex villains. Like, they're just straight up bad guys. There's no, oh, well, their mother was bad to them or anything like that. It was, they're straight up bad guys. But they're good bad guys. Like, they're good at being bad.
They're effective bad guys.
What's that?
They're effective bad guys.
They're effective bad guys. And that's what we want. Like, we want to show not that our heroes are incompetent. We want to show that our heroes are just really good, and there's a lot of incompetence that allowed them to get there. And again, back to Ben's point, in the beginning, we talk about how they land with $175,000 in 1942 money, and Ben did the translation to what that would be, and he's like, "Are you sure you want it to be 175,000?" And I showed him the information on Operation Pastorius, and that's how much money they were given to launch their sabotage campaign. Now, what sucked for them, I mean, good for the U.S., is that they were pretty much instantly captured. So they didn't get to carry out any sabotage campaigns, but that's how serious the Nazis were about carrying out this sabotage campaigns. That, do you remember what that would be in today's money, Ben?
I don't remember. Hold on. Yeah, I thought I made a note of it, but
yeah, it was something in the like millions of dollars. You know, I hope Ben will come up with
943 or 3,943,662 and 50 cents.
Yeah. I mean, you know, with that kind of money today, you could absolutely carry out a pretty effective sabotage campaign. You know, and so, you know, imagine in 1942 what the damage that they could have done had they not been caught right away. And that's where we can carry our story on from there.
Yeah, it's really crazy to imagine. And I've thought this often when reading these comics where they would be stopping the saboteurs, trying to blow up a shipyard or something like that. That was like every Superman comic, every Captain America comic. And I think, like, kind of think of the real world. It's pretty amazing that we didn't get hit by huge amounts of that in the war. It seems like it would have been pretty easy to pull off. Nothing short of a miracle. In fact, when I was looking at these panels, there was a huge explosion in Cleveland, not in the ammunition depot, but it was I guess a natural gas field. It was right in the lake. It blew up, killed, I want to say, like 300 people. It turned out just to be an accident, but it was so huge, everyone thought it was saboteurs at the time. It took a while for them to sort of notice. You really just can't put natural gas on top and below people's houses.
Well, I think even recently there was a lot of attention drawn to it. Was it like chicken farms or chicken processing plants?
Yeah,
there were several, and like everyone was getting all worried, was very paranoid about it. And someone said, I saw it was on Twitter, so don't take it at face value, but it's like these are very dangerous places at the best of times, and so it's not actually that unusual. So, but yeah,
it's like train derailments. I don't know if it's scarier to think like, oh my God, there's all these train derailments all of a sudden. No, actually, it happens all the time. You're like, wait a second.
Oh, thanks for that. I'll never sleep again.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that
note, have a good night, everybody.
Well, yeah, it's been a blast talking to you. I love talking about this era. I love talking to people that dig into these old comics and really see what's cool about them, and then also, furthermore, what's cool about bringing in to backers on Kickstarter now. So, guys, I appreciate you coming on to share this with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the podcast, and it's really great to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, and before I take off, I need to show a few campaigns with friends of ours that are have stuff going on. First one is our friend CJ Hudson. It's got Hunters of the Outer Realm. I really love how this book looks, and CJ makes great comics. So very excited to see this. It's in pre-launch, so head over there now if you're watching this now or later. And actually, I will throw this in the comments so everyone can easily get at it. But check this one out. CJ's books are always fun, and the art on this looks fantastic. Next one is Remember Part 2. This is kind of a really cool suspense comic. Got shades of True Detective. I've actually checked out some of these. I think maybe the first 2 issues. Really kind of dark crime, drama stuff here. So if you're into that, definitely head over there. I'll throw this one in the comments as well, and check that out. The next one I want to bring up is a live project, American Yakuza. It's by our friend Charlie McKelvey, and I think Stokes the writer. But this one's live now. It's doing really well. You can get a lot of great covers, including mine, which is down here. I think it's cover B. But in addition to that, you can get I think he has like a bunch of covers, actually. This one's a magazine homage. This one's, I think, just really cool. I almost didn't want to finish mine after seeing this. A lot of great stuff on this one. And it's a really fun story. It's an MMA fighter who gets caught up with the Yakuza and gets into no good. So really fun premise. Really great team doing it. The interior art is fantastic. So I definitely recommend checking this one out. And I believe I have that in the show notes, but just in case, I will throw that in the comments as well. The last 2 are, this is by my co-host Joey Galvez. It's also Make 100. It's in pre-launch right now, and this one is definitely in the description. This is a trading card collection based on our magazine Archetypes, which is kind of an homage to Wizard Magazine Hero Illustrated, but by way of modern indie comics. So you get a lot of cool stuff in the magazine, which hopefully you guys have checked out. This campaign is about a trader card collecting pack that you can get Joey come up with a really cool bunch of designs. And he's also kind of got some random assortment of things that are really fun, I think, to play along with and see what cards you get. So head over there and check this one out. And last but not least is my book, which we just got the pre-launch page up. This is the sequel to We Are Scarlet Twilight. I did kind of a lead-in book that we're just about done and ready to send the printer once I get a few more surveys back. But then we'll get into this campaign, which is the big story. This is a combination of Crisis on Infinite Earths and Secret Wars, but if it had been done in the 1940s. So you get all of that, that Golden Age atmosphere and things like that, the sort of pulpy feel, but also I think I'm bringing a lot of the elements of Crisis and Secret Wars that people like. So it's going to be a really fun combination, and I hope everyone will come along on the ride with me because it's going to be a blast. That one is also in the show notes. If you go down on Facebook or YouTube, you can click right over there and get on this pre-launch list and be ready to go. I think that is everything. So guys, just again, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing Press Guardian and the Clock with us. Really cool looking book, and I can't wait to read it.
Thank you again, and good luck with your campaign. That's pretty exciting.
Oh yeah, thank you. All right, well that'll do it for this week. I hope everyone has had as much fun talking with Allan and Ben as I have, and we will be back next week with some more cool indie creators and cool books to look at. Until then, we will see you.